Hello, fellow Rebel Capitalists. Hope you are well. I want to dive into your questions. I'm actually going out to dinner tonight with my good buddy, Chris McIntosh. Really looking forward to hanging out with Chris. It's going to be a good time. And I can assure you we'll be talking about global macro, that's for sure. Eyes getting a little bit better. As you can see, don't have to wear the sunglasses. Still going to wear these for a while. But, I'm able to open it more. And as you can tell, the swelling's gone down significantly. And hopefully we're on the road to recovery here. Just back in Miami, got another doctor's appointment tomorrow morning. I'm keeping my fingers crossed. That'll be the last one. I'll be able to get back to Medellin and start kicking out some whiteboard videos and some more content like we usually do. So lots to talk about, I'm sure. Let's dive into the questions. Boy, oh boy, oh boy. I don't know if you guys saw, but when the Fed raised rates, reverse repo went up to 3.05%. And for about a day, I wasn't checking like every single hour, but from what I saw, for about an entire 24-hour period, the 1 week Treasury, the 1 month Treasury, traded at about 2.45, so 60 basis points under what you could get completely risk-free at the Fed. So, okay, here's another scammer, by the way. I always like to point these out. Whenever you see George Gammon in the chat, unfortunately, that's a scammer. This guy is saying, I'm sure this is some kind of clip farm in Africa or India or something, but whoever gets this should kindly inbox me. This benefit trade is open for just today. Click here to inbox me. Oh, that's a new scam. I haven't heard of that one. It amazes me how creative these scam artists are. I always say if they just took that same effort and creativity into producing goods and services, they'd probably make a heck of a lot more money than by scamming people. But just wanted here, here it is right here, guys. That's the scammer. So just make sure you're aware of that. Okay, let's get into the questions for today. Have you ever considered the impact immigration is having on housing? Not. I mean, I'd have to look at the immigration numbers compared to what they have been in the past. I mean, let's just say that we were 1 million people a year were immigrating to the United States on average for the last 30 years. And let's say 1 year we have 20 million. Yeah, okay, I could see that. But if we're going from 1 million to 1.5, I don't know. And what types of people are immigrating? I'd want to see a pie chart of what their income and education levels were, because if your argument is the majority of the people that are immigrating here are doing it illegally, let's say, coming across the border, I'm not sure how many of those people are going right out and buying a $500,000 house. I lived in Tucson, which is basically a border town. And I can tell you the people coming across the border down in Nogales, they're not running out to the nearest real estate agent and hopping on the MLS. They're living with family and friends and just trying to scrape things together, get by, get a job, rent a place, and send any additional money back to Mexico or wherever they're from. Now, if you're saying, well, George, I looked at the statistics in last year, 100% of the 2 million people that immigrated here were college educated and they were making $75,000 a year or $100,000 a year. Okay. But again, what percentage of those people will go out and buy houses? And also too, you got to remember, we've always had demand from foreigners. Look at how much of the rental stock or the housing stock in Miami, right where I am right now, is owned by foreigners that don't live here. So just because you don't live here, or just because, you know, my point there is that people who don't immigrate to the United States still buy property here at to a significant degree. And I just don't know this would really move the needle. And I think the supply of homes, or at least the supply of homes for sale, which is what we should really worry about. I don't know the supply of homes is that. I know between cycles or in an upcycle, that's important. When the percentage of people, homeowners, that are selling and buying are usually consistent. But when prices go down for a variety of reasons, or unemployment rate goes up, we could instantly go from a housing deficit or shortage to a housing surplus very quickly, depending on how desperately the people need to sell. So I think there's a lot of variables. I think this is probably one of them, but I don't know this is high up the totem pole. Is the repo rate prorated? Yeah. So it's all the rates at IOR, reverse repo, the discount rate, they're all annual rates. Yeah, I mean, they're not, you got to take this to an extreme. IOR is what now, maybe 3.25, and that's an overnight rate. So they're not getting 3.2. But I wish I could get 3.25% every single night. Wouldn't that be amazing? I mean, what is that? 365. Boy, I don't know. What's that? 1,100% per year? That'd be a pretty darn good return. No, it's a great question. And you would think they would spell that out somewhere, but they don't. There's a lot of things like that they just assume you know. I inherited 200K. Should I go all in on gold? GLD? Oh my gosh. No. What do you? No. GLD. I don't know. I think a better way to phrase that question would be, I just inherited $200,000. Should I give it all to HSBC? Because that's what you're doing when you're buying the GLD. Who's the custodian of the supposed gold that you own a paper right to that you can't redeem for actual gold? That would be HSBC. So first of all, if you're going to buy gold for heaven's sakes. Don't buy a piece of paper. And if you're going to buy a piece of paper, buy Sprott that's redeemable. And I wouldn't put 200. I don't know that I would put 100% of my net worth in anything, even if I was like Biff and had like an almanac from the future on what's going to happen with sports events this year. I still wouldn't put 100% of my money on any given game. Who knows? There could be some butterfly effect where I get the almanac and somehow that triggers all these other things that could result in the game actually changing somehow. There's always that risk. So no, I wouldn't put 100% of my net worth in anything. Have you? No, come on. No. Would labor unions in general be more of a complement or a disruption or needed all? Oh yeah, I think labor unions are definitely a part of a free market, but just so long as they're not sponsored by the government. And then I don't think you should have labor unions in government because there's no profit and loss incentive. But as far as in a free market economy, would labor unions exist? Sure, yeah, absolutely. Why not? There's no government coercion that's forcing the workers to join the union, and if they want to practice their rights to gather as a group and kind of flex their muscle and use some leverage to increase wages or do whatever they want to do, let them. Yeah, absolutely. I'm just against, just to be clear again, I'm against government labor unions, and I'm against governments that force the people to join a labor union, or if that's part of the deal, right? That if you join a company, then you have to. You don't even have a choice, and I don't like that. Can you clarify your view on long-term U.S. Treasuries? I don't like long-term U.S. Treasuries. You recently warned against buying them, which is completely opposite of Snyder. Right, but one thing you got to look at is your long-term view and why are you buying them? So Snyder, if you'd say, "Hey Jeff, do you want to buy a 10-year Treasury and keep it for 10 years?" He'd say, "Hell no, absolutely not." Steve Van Meter, "Hey Steve, you want to buy a 30-year Treasury yielding 4% or whatever and keep it for the next 4 years or 30 years?" He'd give you the exact same answer. He'd say not just no, but hell no. Now you say, "Hey, Steve, you want to buy a 30-year bond and keep it for a year and speculate on the price going up because the interest rate goes down and try to make a decent capital gain that will exceed the rate of inflation?" Sure. So you can't just hear Jeff Snyder say, "Oh, I think buying the 10-year, the long end of the curve, is a good investment." You've got to understand why he's saying that, because a lot of people just take that statement and filter it through their own view or their own interpretation of what he is saying, and instead of taking the time to, hey, maybe some of this is on Jeff. Maybe he should communicate that a little bit better. And again, I don't want to put words in his mouth. Maybe he thinks holding a 10-year Treasury for the next 10 years would be fantastic. Who knows? But again, my point here is you've got to focus on time frame, and you've got to understand the rationale for buying the bond in the first place. They're looking at bonds as just kind of capital gains, where most people would look at bonds for yield. They're not looking to flip the bond and make a capital gain. They're looking to hold on to the bond and just use it for cash flow. Would you be buying shorter term U.S. Treasuries now? 3 months to 2 year. I wouldn't buy anything over 6 months. I bought 1-year Treasuries, but that was they were, I forgot what the maturity date was, maybe 9 months, something like that. I bought them at maybe 3%. So you could say, "Well, you've lost money." Well, no, I haven't, because I'm just holding them to maturity because I was happy to get the 3% or whatever they were paying. And my idea was, okay, I'll buy these. Let's just call them 6-month Treasuries, right? I'll buy these 6-month Treasuries now. I'll get paid the 3%, which again, that's an annual rate, so you're going to get 1.5% or whatever. And what if I need to sell them to buy the commodities, which I'm keeping the dry powder for, then that would that would mean the commodities have gone down significantly in price. And if the commodities have gone down significantly in price, that means the interest rate most likely has gone down as well, or I would have had a capital gain. So you say, well, George, the trade didn't really play out. Yeah, it pretty much has, because the interest rates have gone up and the commodity prices are not down to a level where I would want to pull the trigger. Now, I'm very bullish on commodities long term, that's for sure. But I'm still waiting. So we'll have to see how this plays out. Now, if you want to time it, I didn't time it very well. I could have timed it a lot better if I would have really thought it through. And in knowing what I know now, and I know I've studied it and tried to understand it a lot better since I pulled the trigger on that a couple months ago. But I would have probably waited until the 3-month and the 10-year invert. Right now, the 6-month and the 10-year is inverted. What you notice is it goes, it started with the 5-year inversion between the 5-year and the 10-year. And then it went to like the 2-year, then the 1 year. Now it's at 6 months. So it's gradually going shorter. And historically, once you see it go all the way to the 3-month Treasury, as far as the 3-month yielding a higher interest rate than the 10-year Treasury, then you're getting real darn close. Or the market, who knows, maybe the market's wrong. The bond market rarely is. But the market is telling you are very, very close to the Fed hitting the pause button or reversing course. And so that, I think, would have been a better time if I was just trying to time it for a capital gain. But again, that's not really why I was buying them. But if that was my game, if I was trying to like swing trade bonds, and that's what I'd do. I'd wait to the 3-month goes higher than the 10-year, and then I'd load up on, I don't know, probably 3-month, 6-month, probably 3-month Treasuries, T-bills. But I guess that depends too. It depends on where commodity prices are at the time, because that's really my end game, and I can't lose focus. I'm just kind of, I'm trying to add an additional step from cash to commodities. I'm trying to add a step of cash to T-bills to commodities, just to kind of boost my return. And while I'm waiting, get paid more than 0% by just having it in the bank account. So I'm getting a little cute there, but I got to remember that the end game is just to keep that dry powder for commodities and buy them when they get cheap. Which EU nation do you suspect will suffer the least? I don't know all the countries that are in the EU. I'm not very good. I don't study that stuff at all. For some reason, I'm very interested in the way things work, but I'm not as much interested in just, which countries are in the EU. Not that this is a bad question, it's a great question, but just so you know my personality, finding out or trying to understand or figuring out how some sort of mechanism works, like the banking system, I find that fun. I really enjoy that. But just kind of finding a mundane fact about how many countries are there or something, although it's important, I don't want to take anything away from your question, but as far as my personality, that I don't really get too excited about stuff like that. So, but let me try to answer this question here. EU countries. So Portugal might be interesting. Let's see, they're definitely in the EU. Is Croatia in the EU? If Croatia was in the EU, I'd put that in there. Well, Turkey's in the EU, aren't they? I think, wait a minute. Maybe they're not. Hold on a second. Let me Let me pull up a list here. This is actually a really good question. I should know this. I really should know this because I just was hanging out over the weekend with Nigel Farage. If you guys know who he is, really nice dude. I mean, great guy. Yeah, so here's, let me look at a list. Okay, Austria, Belgium, Czech Republic, Hungary, Ireland. No, so Turkey, I was way off. Turkey's not there, so forget that. Portugal, and I'm not really a huge fan of their economy or anything, but I think they got a golden visa program that could be interesting. And it doesn't seem like they try to get politically charged. They're not trying to be at the forefront of, it seems like they're more like Switzerland, where they just kind of step back and like, yeah, we'll give you our opinion every once in a while, but we just want to remain neutral. I like countries like that. So Portugal, that's probably, I mean, there's some interesting components with a lot of these countries. Like Estonia, they've got a really cool tech scene there, from what I've heard. Hungary, they may be leading more in the lines of political or personal freedom. Sweden, we know what they did during the cerveza sickness. That's a good thing. But yeah, out of this list, I think by the way, oh yeah, Croatia is here. I would have to say Croatia and Portugal. If we get hyperinflation in the U.S., do silver stockers, okay, believe that the grocery store clerk will accept? Well, I don't know. I'm not one of those people, so you'd have to ask them. Well, listen, if it gets to a point where you're trading silver coins back and forth, there's not going to be a grocery store. There might be a farmer's market type thing, but there ain't going to be a Whole Foods. There's not going to be a Ralph's or a Safeway. You're talking about going back to the 1800s, my friend, and just going to some local farmers and seeing if they'll accept your silver coins. And that would be a significant decrease in the standard of living. But yeah, maybe it will come to that. I don't know that I would be too concerned about hyperinflation in the United States. I don't know that you can find an example of a global reserve currency that's hyperinflated. I was just listening to Dalio's book where he goes over kind of the timeline there. And you go from the Dutch guilder, I believe, according to what Dalio was saying, was the first technical global reserve currency. And then we went from the Dutch guilder to the British pound, and then from the British pound to the dollar. But, the Dutch guilder didn't hyperinflate away, nor did the British pound. So the probability that the United States dollar hyperinflates away is very low. Doesn't mean that we can't get 20-30% inflation. And trust me, that level of inflation would almost be Mad Max in and of itself. So we don't have to have Weimar Germany or Venezuela to have the same economic impact, or a similar, I shouldn't say, it's going to an extreme, but a similar economic impact as far as the standard of living decreasing. And but I can give you a hint here, is if you do look at the hyperinflations of the past, I was able to look up some data on Weimar Germany. You can see the actual increase, the percentage increase in the money supply in M2. And so you can just compare that to the United States. I actually did that in a whiteboard video about a year and a half ago. And most people think that the hyperinflation in Germany started in 21, 22, right around there, when actually the seeds of the hyperinflation were sown starting in World War I. Starting in 1914, 1915, Germany started increasing their money supply by about 60% per year. So that's a lot. Let me give you some context. During 2020, we were all freaking out, including myself, and saying and waving a red flag saying, hey, the United States just increased their M2 money supply by almost 25%. Might have been a little over 25% actually. And that's a big deal. But again, Germany was doing it year over year over year over year at 60%, 60, every single year on average, compounded. And they didn't have hyperinflation for 7 years. And I would add, during 21, or just, it's either 21, 22, right around in there, but about 9 months prior to the hyperinflation really taking off and just going parabolic, their currency actually appreciated in value relative to gold. Isn't that crazy? Their currency, 9 months before it turned to toilet paper, it actually appreciated against gold and I believe the United States dollar, because the dollar is pegged to gold. So it's just, when I saw that on the chart, I thought, wow, that was fascinating. Just think how many people back then and how many Keynesian economists, I know that wasn't a thing back then, but I'm sure you had economists debating back and forth as to whether they should continue to expand the money supply. And think of the argument, the debate back then. Think about how many people would have said, oh, absolutely, we need to continue to expand the money supply by 60. Oh, you guys are just fear-mongering, that'll never happen. And think, look, we expand the money supply by 60% every single year. The stock market goes up, the housing market goes up, which is exactly what happened in Weimar, Germany. And that was one of the reasons why they continued to print and print and print. And they didn't stop after World War I, because they saw asset prices going up at a faster rate of inflation. So they said, we're getting rich, we're getting a free lunch here. Because sure, inflation's at 15%. Who cares? Asset prices are going up by 30. So why would we stop printing money? We're not having to work and we're just getting rich for free. And we're consuming more than we produce. We found the goose that lays the golden egg. Sound familiar? I hope so. If it doesn't, you're not paying attention. But my main point is the German mark at the time was not the global reserve currency. And if it would have been, would they have experienced hyperinflation? I don't know. They would have experienced significant domestic inflation, absolutely, because they're increasing their money supply by 60%. But would they have done the higher? I don't know. It's interesting when you consider those different variables, isn't it? But I guess the main takeaway there is, one, global reserve currency. Two, if you're worried about hyperinflation, you can actually quantify it using history and what has happened in the past. And once the United States starts, let's say, doubling the M2 money supply annually, then I think we could really start having that conversation about the probabilities of hyperinflation. But until they get to that point, especially with the reserve currency, I don't think it's, I wouldn't put it high on my list of priorities as far as allocating much mental bandwidth to trying to figure it out. I'm just going through here, guys. I'm looking for comments that start with the word question. Do you think we will be getting power cuts in the future. I think that varies from state to state. If you live in California, my answer would be yes. If you live in any other state, my answer would probably be no. And I'm assuming you're from the United States. If you're from Europe, obviously it's a much different question. Or if you're from Saudi Arabia, that's a much different question. Or if you're from Russia, that's a much different question. But assuming you're from the United States, and the future is a long, long time, by the way. So let's be more specific. Do you think we'll get power cuts in the next 3 years? Let's start with that one. In the United States, then outside of California, because California, it's almost a given. I don't know about power cuts. Although if Russia cut off our supply of plutonium, that could do it. I wish I knew more about the infrastructure of the electrical grid in the United States, state by state. But I've discussed this to a certain degree with my good friend Rick Rule. And he always tells me that if you turn off the uranium to the United States, you're not going to be able to turn on the lights. So I know he's not saying that just for 100% of the population, but there would be a percentage there that would be included in your question. And if we keep poking China in the stick with an eye, or excuse me, in the eye with a stick, and they form an alliance with Russia, which I think is pretty probable. And, if they're on the same team and we start a war with China over Taiwan, and then Russia says, okay, we're going to be on team China for obvious reasons. Probably not big fans of the United States, and we're not big fans of Russia right now. At least we'll talk about from a political standpoint. People are different. I'm just talking about the politicians. And therefore, why wouldn't Russia say no more enriched plutonium for the United States? Sorry. And I don't know what percentage of the world's plutonium is enriched in Russia, but it's a significant amount. I'm talking like 60, 70, 80%. And I believe we are one of their main customers. So, and even if we're not, they cut things offline, that price goes up and we get it, but we get it at a much higher price. So even if there aren't power cuts in the future, the power prices could be so high where effectively they are cuts because no one can afford to use the energy. There's always that. So I think in the next 3 years that there's a possibility there for sure that we need to be cognizant of. And I'm sure there's other black swans that I can't even think about because our power grid is so frail, because our energy policies are so stupid. And let's not forget, we're just draining the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, the SPR. That's not a smart move by any stretch. And so what happens if we get caught with our pants down? What happens if, you know what I mean by using that saying, what happens if we get into a compromising position where it is a matter of national security and not just because we have midterm elections and Biden's trying to buy votes by getting the price of gas down? What if we actually do have a national emergency and we're dry? We don't have anything in the SPR. Then what happens to power? Then what happens to gas? Then what happens to distillates, diesel, right? And trust me, you'd probably rather have no power than no diesel. I'd have to, yeah. If I had to choose between no power and no diesel, assuming that you could get the diesel into the trucks without power. I mean, I know there's a lot of layers and that gets really complex, but just at surface level, I would probably choose diesel over electricity. Because you can live without electricity, and people did it for a long, long time. But you can't live without food. And if you don't have the diesel, you don't have the food. So, because how are you going to get it? Right? You say, "Oh, George, well, the United States grows a ton of food." Yeah, okay. So, what are you going to walk over to Kansas real quick and just go cut some wheat yourself? Go nuts. But and I'm sure someone that's an expert could say, no, George, we'd rather have electricity because of X, Y, and Z. Like if I got my good friend Art Berman on, he might set me straight. But you see what I'm saying? My point is, don't discount the need for other things outside of simply just electricity when it comes to the need for energy, right? Now, as far as other countries, I'd have to do it on a country by country basis. But as far as 5 years in the United States, yeah, I think it's even more likely then because I think we'll have a central bank digital currency by then. And if we have a central bank digital currency, I think they'll start to allocate credit based on narrative instead of by merit. And the net result of that is going to be a massive misallocation of resources. And we've seen how that movie ends. We've seen how that plays out in China. We've seen how that plays out in communist Russia. When you get central planners trying to allocate resources, you get a scarcity of those resources. And if we have a scarcity of power or a scarcity of those resources because of the folly and the economic distortions and the mistakes of the authoritarians and central planners, then the people are going to feel it, and they're going to feel it in a way that's real, and that they're just not going to have access to power, or they might not have access to power at a price they can actually afford. And then 10 years, 20 years, I mean, that's so far off in the future. Who knows? Who knows? I think it gets more probable as we go throughout the decade, just because I think there's a high probability that the fourth turning has a lot of merit. And it's, in my opinion, this decade is going to be very tumultuous, and will probably get more tumultuous as we go into the latter stages. I was actually talking to Nigel about that, Nigel Farage, and he has the same, very similar view. Hopefully I'm pronouncing his name right. If I'm not, Nigel, I apologize. What are you doing with your Russian stocks that can't be sold? Or what do you, well, you pretty much answered your own question, Brandon. What are you doing with your Russian stocks that you can't do anything with? Yeah, I'm not doing anything with them. I can't do anything with them, Brandon. I wish I could give you some great advice. Oh, there's the scammer, George Gammon. Oh, I don't know. This person's asking me what my thoughts are on Andy Schechtman's interview with Jay Martin. Still a little tough for me to read, guys. Sorry. BRICS gold standard in the future. I haven't heard this interview. As far as the BRIC countries going to a gold standard, I'd have to, the probability is far higher today than it was 6 months ago, I'll tell you that. There's pros and cons there, because a government basically foregoing the ability to just increase the money supply at will, or putting a constraint on themselves, that doesn't happen too often. That's not really in the government's best interest. That said, if your priority as a government is to force the world to de-dollarize, and that was a higher priority than not having the constraint of the volatility in the money supply, or being able to create more currency units at will, then maybe. I mean, it's just kind of, it's kind of like a cost benefit analysis, and I don't know what their priorities are. If their number one priority is de-dollarizing, then that increases the odds quite significantly. But if their number one priority is keeping control and not constraining themselves when it comes to their money supply, then the probability of this is incredibly low. But I don't know if there's a way that you could do both. You might, what they might be able to do is set up a currency that wasn't tied to a significant, to a specific sovereign. So it's not the gold-backed yuan, it's not the gold-backed ruble, it's not the gold-backed dinar, lira, whatever. It's the gold-backed XYZ that is, you know, maybe what they do is they set up a BRIC bank like the IMF. And we have the IMF, so why can't the BRICS have one? And they give it authority to do X, Y, and Z, and they deposit all this gold with the BRIC IMF, what is called the BRIC bank, and then they issue SDRs, or something that is the equivalent of like a gold-backed SDR, and then the countries can maintain their autonomy when it comes to trying to micromanage the money supply, because they feel as though now, you know, they don't have that constraint of the gold standard, and they can go ahead and increase the money supply if they think it's appropriate. But you do have the benefit of a competing gold-backed currency to take share away from the dollar, that is more in line with what Keynes had talked about in Bretton Woods with Bancor. And I know that was the currency. What was the name of the bank he was talking about? World Bank and Bancor, or something like that. But he was basically talking about that back in '44. And so maybe the BRICS go that route. I'm spitballing this. I'm just talking, kind of thinking through this out loud. So that could be a possibility. But those are kind of I think if I'm the Chinese government, or if I'm the Russian government, or if I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of a typical politician, those are the variables that I'm trying to weigh. And maybe that is a potential solution. We'll have to see. The one thing I can assure you is this decade is going to be very volatile, and you're going to see significant changes happening very quickly. I've used that saying from Lenin many, many times, where he said that decades go by where nothing happens, and there's weeks that go by when decades happen. And I think we're in a decade where you're potentially going to see centuries go by. And this is what we need to prepare for as investors and people who want to not just survive, but thrive in this crazy, crazy, crazy world that's getting just crazier by the day. So that's thinking out loud there. I know I didn't maybe answer your question specifically because I didn't see that interview, but those are my thoughts on the BRIC countries and maybe a potential currency backed by gold moving forward. Where's the best place to store cash? Probably in a hole in your backyard. Oh, no. Bonds, physical, or T-bills. Okay. I would say T-bills. Short-term T-bills. 1 month, roll them over. 3 months, something like that. The life insurance question, I have no idea. I don't know anything about life insurance. Do I have any thoughts on investing in Oceania? No, I don't. I would be worried about liquidity there. Yeah, see, Americans very, very rarely consider liquidity. I've noticed that's a big blind spot for them. And it makes sense why. Because in the United States, you don't have to worry about that at all. If you have an asset, you can sell it instantly. You got a house, sell it in a half hour. Put on the MLS, you have a bidding war, or at least you did 3 or 4 months ago. I don't know about now. But even if you have a very quote unquote illiquid asset, that just means it's going to take you 6 months to sell it. Where outside of the United States, an illiquid asset means it's going to take you 5 years to sell it. And someplace like Vanuatu or the Cook Islands, although Fiji, these places may be very beautiful, but be careful because there could be some great opportunities there. But it would be basically like taking your money and putting it in a lockbox that no one could access for a decade, right? And that's if you put it for sale in 5 years. It takes you another 5 years to sell it. Who knows? You're dealing with a whole different ballgame there. And I know this from experience. I know this because I made that mistake in Ecuador. And sometimes you could have a perfect asset at a great price. And even if you lower the price, it doesn't matter. People won't buy it because there are just no buyers at any price. There's just not enough people. And so you don't lower your price. You just have to play the waiting game and just wait for some buyer to just happen to like what you like. And often that can take years. So that would be my concern with investing in these areas, assuming you're talking about real estate. Do you think the Fed has less power over the bond markets than people think? Is confidence keeping debt from selling off and yields going higher? Yep. Yes. I mean, if you want proof of this, just look at, like I said at the beginning of the live stream, look at reverse repo and the 1 month Treasury. So just in case you don't know, the reverse repo rate set by the Fed is supposed to be their way of setting a floor on interest rates. So that's the way they could, when they say we've raised the Fed funds rate to a range between 3.25% and 3%, or between 3.25 and 3.5%. That's our range for Fed funds. What they're doing is they're saying that's the range that we want the overnight rate to be for the dollar globally, or at least domestically. And so they can control IOR because that's what they pay on reserves. They control the discount rate. They control reverse repo. And the theory is that if they set reverse repo at, let's say, 3%, they're setting a floor on interest rates because nobody would lend at a lower rate, because why would you do that when there's going to be risk involved, when you could lend the Fed your money and get 3% completely risk-free? Why would anyone do that? And so the pointy heads, or the PhDs at the Fed, they thought, well, no one will. And we're brilliant, we're smart, we know all the variables, so the market can't outsmart us. So we'll just do this reverse repo rate. And then the market comes by and just goes, pow, and punches them in the face. What I'm talking about is the 1-month Treasury. Sure, you want interest rates to be at a minimum 3.05%. Okay, we're just going to go ahead and trade the 1 month at 2.45, 60 basis points under the rate you're trying to set as a floor. That's basically the bond market giving the Fed the middle finger and saying, we don't care what you want interest rates to be, we are going to set the floor for interest rates. And of course, the Fed doesn't like to talk about this. And for some reason, this gets no airplay on CNBC. Not even mentions it once. And I've got to give credit where credit's due. I started watching it when I heard Snyder and Emil start talking about it. This was probably 6 months ago. And I remember back then, they were talking about it on their podcast, and they were shocked that it was like 10 basis points under reverse repo. And now it's 60 basis points. And now I know there is an argument, and a very good argument, that not everyone has access to reverse repo. Got it. I get it. I totally get it. And so you could see a little bit of a delta. But let's say it's the delta going back is usually 3 basis points, 5 basis points. We're not talking about 60 basis points. That's a whole different ballgame. And even the argument that 100% of the delta is a result of foreign entities, let's say a Japanese pension fund, not having access to reverse repo. I don't know. I mean, I'm no expert. I'm just an amateur. But if I'm a Japanese pension fund, how would I not have access to Fed's repo indirectly, right? They're not banking with a bank that has access to reverse repo at the Fed. And if they're not, the bank that they bank with doesn't have a corresponding banking relationship with a bank in the United States, or they don't have a sister bank. They don't have a bank that's under the same corporate umbrella or a subsidiary, or they're not a subsidiary of a U.S. domestic bank that has access to reverse repo. I don't know. I mean, I get it. If you're average Joe in Japan, sure, you don't have access to it. But I don't know. If you're a $20 billion pension fund in Europe, I think you could figure out a way to get that 3.05%. Maybe I'm wrong. Again, I'm not an expert. Just trying to use some good old-fashioned common sense. But that still doesn't negate the fact the 1 month is trading 60, 60. And this is very unusual. And so what is this telling you? This is telling you that the market wants those treasuries for some reason, and they're willing to pay 60 basis points to get them. And when I say 60 basis points, because that's what they're giving up by not parking that cash on the Fed's balance sheet, or not parking it in reverse repo. That's a better way of saying it. So why? Why would they do that? Well, Jeff Snyder would say, because, George, There's a collateral shortage, and that is the pristine collateral. So they're willing to pay up for the best collateral that they would prefer over cash because it gives them more flexibility in terms of managing their balance sheet. But I'd take it one step further. Hey, listen, guys, Jeff is 1,000 times smarter than I ever will be, but I see it a little bit differently. From a standpoint, when I hear a collateral shortage or a collateral deficit, the first thing I think of is an excess of counterparty risk. Think about that. Why do we even need collateral? Why do the banks need collateral? Because there's a risk they won't be paid back. If there was absolutely no risk of them getting paid back, would they need collateral? Nope. If they gave a loan to themselves, as an example, would they need collateral? So when you take it to an extreme, it's a lot easier to understand the concept. When counterparty risk increases, or let's say perceived counterparty risk, so does the need for collateral. It's either that or the economy, the global economy is just booming and people need that collateral because they're trying to lever up. I don't know. I think we're more in a risk-off type of environment with the global banking system. So assuming you have that same view, then a shortage of collateral is just another way of saying excess counterparty risk. Sure, you can have that $1 billion loan, corporation XYZ. But if you want that 5% interest rate that you got in the past, we're going to need a lot more collateral. And oh, by the way, last time you gave those mortgage-backed securities, yeah, that's not going to work this time. This time, the only collateral we're willing to accept 1-month T-bills. Why? Because there's just a lot more risk in the world. Shoot, we don't have a choice. We got to go buy those 1-month T-bills. What are they trading at, Steve? 2.45%. What? You mean I got to pay 60 basis points to buy those stupid things? Or those are trading 60 basis points less? They're trading at a premium? They're trading at that high of a price? Yep. Do we have a choice? Nope. All right. I guess we have to buy the treasuries at any price because we need the loan for $1 billion. See, guys, in my opinion, it goes back to counterparty risk. That's all the 1-month treasury is telling us right now. The amount of counterparty risk in the global economy is increasing. I don't want to say exponentially, but I will say significantly. All right, we'll leave it at that. Let me do some shout outs here, and I'm going to fire over to Rebel Capitalist Pro to do some Q&A for the Pro members. We're fantastic. If you guys are interested in checking out Rebel Capitalist Pro, which you absolutely should, partners in there with Lynn Alden and Chris McIntosh, not to be confused with Chris Martinson, another good buddy of mine. And Brett Johnson is one of the pros over there, Jason Hartman, Patrick Serezna. So you guys could check that out. I think Gene, my digital marketing guy, has a promotion still going. It's always going on. You can try it out 1 week for $1. Can't beat it. It's at georgegammon.com/pro. And in today's investment environment, that, in my opinion, is going to be far more tumultuous and volatile moving forward, if you can even imagine that. I don't think there's any greater resource out there than Rebel Capitalist Pro. So check it out. Again, georgegammon.com/pro. Okay, shout outs here. We got Felipe Dukart in the house, All Nighter Hider, RR, Christina Rose, Jim Wolf, LEFE, Lancelot, Dufran, Condon, maybe. SW, Eric in the house. Chris Sauer, Doc Fish, Yellow Squanchy, John Skinner, me, Mike, G3 Power. It skipped on me. Oh, no, there it is. Book 335. Becky B in the house. Mike Collin, Ken Long. All right, guys. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and I'll see you in the next video.